Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and begin our investigation into the platypus. We're talking about nature's most bizarre living genetic link between reptiles, birds, and mammals. Now, we all know the platypus looks a little, well, weird, but its true weirdness goes all the way down to its very DNA. For the longest time, the scientific community has been completely baffled by this creature, mostly because it seems to just break all the known rules of biology. So today, we're going to decode that genetic structure to figure out not just why the platypus is so strange, but what its very existence actually tells us about our own evolutionary history. To really appreciate this animal, we have to travel back in time a bit to 1798, right when it was first discovered in Australia. Picture this. You're a European scientist back then, and someone hands you a specimen that has the thick fur of a mammal, a tail that looks exactly like an otter's, and the leathery beak of a duck. It was so incredibly unbelievable that zoologist George Shaw, when he first examined it, literally thought it was a fake. He and plenty of other scientists seriously suspected it was just a hoax, like some patchwork creature artificially stitched together by pranksters. It just absolutely did not fit into any known category of life. But fast forward to today. Modern scientists have basically traded in their magnifying glasses for DNA sequencers, stepping up as genetic detectives to finally solve this centuries-old mystery. And an international team of researchers achieved something absolutely monumental. They extracted the DNA from a single female platypus, affectionately named Glennie, by the way, and from Glennie, they successfully read a staggering 2.2 billion genetic letters. Think about that. This wasn't just some standard sequencing project. This was unlocking a biological vault that had been sealed shut for millions of years. So, what did those 2.2 billion letters actually prove? Well, they confirmed that the platypus isn't just some random biological oddity or a freak of nature. It's a vital, living evolutionary link. You see, the genetic data shows that the platypus began diverging from other mammals roughly 170 million years ago. And because of that incredibly early split, it held on to traits from multiple distinct ancestors. It successfully bridges this massive gap between early reptiles and modern mammals. It's quite literally a walking, swimming time machine. And when you actually lay out these traits side by side, the bizarre hybrid nature of the platypus becomes crystal clear. On one hand, you've got its distinct mammalian traits, right? It has thick hair and it feeds its young with milk. Normal enough. But then it behaves like a bird or a reptile because the female lays eggs instead of giving live birth. And then there's the truly wild part. The male platypus actually produces venom. Let that sink in. It is the only mammal on the entire planet capable of doing this. It's a living chimera, blending these completely different categories together in a way no other creature on Earth does. To put this into perspective, let's look at what Chris Ponting, a scientist over at Oxford University, had to say. He points out that the DNA of the platypus literally contains traits of lizards, birds, and mammals, all wrapped up into one single animal. Now, you might be wondering, why does this matter to you and me? Well, because by studying the platypus, we are actually looking at genes that our very own distant mammalian ancestors once had. The platypus managed to preserve these ancient genes, while the rest of the mammalian family tree, and yep, that includes us humans, just completely lost them over millions of years of evolution. Tracing its timeline builds a really clear picture of how evolution actually works. A super common misconception is that the platypus is just this evolutionary dead end, somehow stubbornly stuck in the past. But the timeline proves that's simply not true. Yes, it diverged 170 million years ago, but it kept going. It actively developed really complex weapons and hunting tools in its later evolutionary stages. The platypus was charting its own highly specialized path, continually adapting to its environment long after it split off from its reptilian cousins. And those late-stage adaptations, they resulted in some incredibly advanced survival traits. For example, that venom we just talked about, it's delivered through these sharp spurs on the male's hind legs, and it's used primarily for defense and competition. And that iconic, silly-looking duck beak, it's definitely not just for show. It is a highly sophisticated electrosensitive organ. It literally allows the platypus to hunt underwater blind by detecting the super faint electrical signals given off by its prey. These bizarre traits developed completely independently, which proves the platypus didn't just barely survive. It specialized in the most fascinating ways you could imagine. But listen, as wild as a venomous, egg-laying mammal with an underwater radar beak is, the physical stuff isn't even the strangest part of the story. If we transition from what we can see on the outside to what's hidden deep inside Glenn Jenny's genetic code, things get chaotic. The absolute deepest genetic mystery researchers uncovered wasn't about its fur or its beak at all. It was about how the sex of a platypus is determined. And this perfectly illustrates the sheer scale of the genetic anomaly we're dealing with. If you look at the human baseline, our simple, clean, two-chromosome system with an X and a Y, the platypus reality is just staggering. Instead of two sex chromosomes, it is running on a wildly complex 10-chromosome system. You heard that right, 5 X chromosomes and 5 Y chromosomes. It is an absolute genetic pileup compared to our neat little human setup. Now, when you throw 5 X's and 5 Y's into the mix, the math gets really complicated really fast. Ewan Birney over at the European Bioinformatics Institute looked at this data and made a pretty staggering observation. He noted that if you just look at the theoretical combinations of having 5 of each sex chromosome, mathematically, it creates the possibility of 25 different genders. Just imagine the sheer biological chaos if a species actually had to navigate 25 different genders just to reproduce. So, the crucial takeaway here is understanding the difference between theoretical math and biological reality. While the math absolutely allows for 25 different genders, the platypus reality keeps it functionally constrained to just male and female. It's a fantastic, kind of funny example of how absurd nature's calculations can look on paper, but how biology ultimately finds a way to streamline all that chaos so the species can actually survive, without needing a spreadsheet to find a mate. Ultimately, this whole genetic deep dive reveals that this incredible creature is way, way more than just an ancient relic or some zoological punchline. By mapping out those 2.2 billion genetic letters, scientists have proven that the platypus is a totally unique guide to our own evolution. Understanding this creature, the exact same one that George Shaw literally thought was a stitched-together prank back in 1798, actually helps us decode the broader magnificent story of mammalian evolution. It shows us the exact stepping stones between reptiles, birds, and us. Which brings us to a final provocative thought I want to leave you with today. We spend so much time looking at the platypus and marveling at how weird it is, right? But this genetic mapping proves that the platypus is the one that held on to the evolutionary secrets, the ancient genes, and the diverse traits that the rest of the mammalian family simply left behind. So instead of asking why the platypus is so strange, maybe we should be looking at ourselves and asking, what did we lose along the way? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this changes how you view nature's most wonderful genetic puzzle. Keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next one.